Ken Harbaugh is a former US Navy pilot and mission commander who served from 1996 to 2005 as an EP3 signals intelligence aviator, flying missions focused on adversaries including Russia, North Korea, and China. Aren't those the days when we saw our adversaries as adversaries? Well, we're going to dive into that in this conversation. After leaving the Navy, he earned a JD, Juris Doctor from Yale Law School, taught at the Citadel, and as a guest fellow at Yale, co-founded The Mission Continues and Got Your Six, later held senior leadership roles at Team Rubicon, and has since become a media and podcast figure through Burn the Boats, Warriors in Their Own Words, and the Ken Harbaugh Show. He is a special correspondent for MeidasTouch. Hopefully, with my dear friend ChatGPT, I got your biography more or less correct.
Good enough.
Good enough.
Great to be with you.
Fantastic. Before we get in, I wanted to draw people's attention, and I really think following this conversation, they should go out and watch it. You've done some extraordinary reporting on the drone hunters of Kherson. Could you give a little bit of background about what led up to that and why that particular story resonated and that you chose to take considerable risk in bringing that story to light?
Well, I was drawn to this particular unit in Kherson that patrols along the highway of death that divides the devastated region down to the bank of the Dnieper, across which the Russians are encamped, and they launch their FPV drones from the left bank. They fly over the highway of death into the occupied, or I shouldn't say occupied, that's the Russian side, the inhabited, the populated part of Kherson. Civilians are still existing. They're still surviving, but they need those drone hunters of Kherson to defend them. And they have to do it with rifles. These fiber optic FPV drones now cannot be jammed. They cannot be even detected because they're emitting no EM signature. You have to be on patrol. You have to see them. You have to hear them. And then you have to shoot them down before they hit a civilian target. And that is their main target in this area of Kherson. It's the old lady coming back from the market with shopping bags. It is a terror campaign waged against the civilian population of Kherson to try to depopulate it. And one of the things that really struck me about these crews that go out day after day and risk their lives intercepting these drones is that I thought they would be resentful of the civilians who stayed behind, because the evacuation order went out long ago. The government tried to evacuate these neighborhoods of Kherson, and I thought that the soldiers defending them would be angry that they had to. And in fact, it was just the opposite. They were just so immensely proud of the Khersonians, the Ukrainians who stayed behind, as their act of resistance. Just staying in their homes, in their apartments, was their act of defiance against Putin's aggression. And the soldiers shooting down the drones, trying to attack these civilians, were all the more proud to be Ukrainian for it.
And what do we know? Oh, I've spoken to Zirina Zabriskie, who's covered this a lot, tried to bring this story to light and done extraordinary work there. What shocks me about this is that there's no real strategic military gain here, except to denude areas of population. But even then, Russia's not going to be retaking it anytime soon. What we believe is happening is that Russian FPV pilots are training. They're training and entertaining themselves by committing murder, essentially. How did it strike you, from the footage and then, real life, seeing it happen?
Yeah, Zarina, to her immense credit, coined the phrase the human safari. That's how the Russians themselves have come to describe these missions, because they are hunting people, they are hunting civilians. And it's made all the worse by the fact that then they boast about it online. The reason we have these videos of Russian FPVs either dropping grenades on or flying directly into civilian targets is because the Russians post them themselves as kind of a boast online of another target hit. And it's not just drones. When I was on patrol with the drone hunters of Kherson, we actually had to stop short of our ultimate objective because the Russians had very recently laid, I imagine with a rocket deployment or some other type of artillery, butterfly mines across a wide swath of a populated neighborhood. And like you said, there is no strategic purpose for something like that. It is pure terror. It is waging a campaign of terror against the civilian population, and I'm sure the idea of practice for their drone pilots comes into it as well.
And in the intro, I want to go back to that. You have built your career in the military fighting what we traditionally knew as our adversaries, North Korea, China, and Russia. We are living in a topsy-turvy world here where the US is fighting Iran and yet lift sanctions on Iranian oil at sea. 14 billion, I believe. I think that was either the Bulwark or MeidasTouch reporting on that. That is an order of magnitude 10 times greater than the dispensation made by President Obama, for which there was an absolute furore some years ago. So we are giving succor, we are showing weakness to our adversaries. Russia also has had sanctions lifted, and nations trading with it have had temporary dispensation to trade that oil, again worth many, many billions of dollars, which is going to go on exactly the kind of weapons that we've just been talking about. This isn't a question as such, but more a reaction to this through the looking glass kind of world we find ourselves in.
Well, the total lack of preparation for the inevitability of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz is a damning indictment of the incompetence of this administration. In addition to flying ISR missions off of Russia, China, and North Korea, I was a Fifth Fleet combat recon pilot. I flew more missions than I can count over the Strait of Hormuz. We have been rehearsing for decades for exactly this kind of thing. Yet I fear that we have in the White House a president who refuses to receive bad information. Everyone around him is telling him he's the greatest president in history. They'll even go on the record saying that, as absurd as it is. And my suspicion is that when a worst case scenario is presented to this president, he either doesn't look at it or says, I don't ever want to hear from that person again. We knew that on page one of the Iranian military's playbook was close the Strait of Hormuz. Yet it seemed to have caught this Pentagon by complete surprise. And when asked about it, Pete Hegseth, our Secretary of Defense, said, well, the straits are open except for Iranian missiles and mines. When the president was asked about why they didn't anticipate all of these strikes on targets in allied countries, on embassies, on the urban centers in the UAE, his response is, well, it all happened so fast. And I'm almost at a loss for words because we've had 47 years to prepare for this kind of thing. I know other administrations have looked at this scenario and decided it was not worth it. And yet this administration offered competing rationales, changing by the minute. And even worse than the lack of a coherent rationale explained to the American people is the lack of a plan. And you see the results of that lack of a plan in the spiking of the oil price and now the begging of allies for help after we've spent years denigrating their contributions to America's security.
It's something, isn't it, like saying Britain's free to trade with the world in 1942, except for the U-boats. Just one minor little
Right.
problem. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's fine and entertaining to poke President Trump and the inconsistencies in his policy, and I think it's the right thing to do. But in their way and in their sort of diplomatic tones and language, which is totally at variance to Trump, we have European leaders who are still buying Russian LNG, who are still in this fifth year of the war, pumping money into the Kremlin, a Kremlin which is then attacking them. We have the Belgian Prime Minister blocking the aid, the Russian central bank assets, and then we have Orban blocking the aid that was supposed to make up for that lack of leadership, that weakness there. We have a global deficit, it seems, in leadership, and this isn't just a Trump problem. This is a problem of all of the Western countries essentially feeding the enemies the money and the resources that are then going to be turned to destroy
Yeah.
us.
Well, not all of the Western countries. Russia's neighbors appreciate the threat. Russia's immediate neighbors are the ones who realize just how dangerous of a threat Russia is, and they have gone all in on the side of Ukraine because they know that they are next. And if there's any doubt as to the imperialistic ambitions of Putin and the threat they truly pose, just talk to the Estonians and the Latvians and the Lithuanians and the Poles, and look at that border. It looks like they are preparing for World War III, but with that World War I flavor. It is a trench complex along that entire front, and I think that should wake people up to the reality of what is coming if Ukraine should fall.
And of course, I think it took a long time for people to wrap their heads around the fact that Ukraine hadn't fallen and wasn't going to fall, because that was the core expectation. So whereas Western intelligence had pointed towards full-scale invasion, which actually many struggle to believe, including many Russian experts. We won't go too far into that because actually I think a lot of lives were wasted by people normalizing these analyses and sticking their heads in the sand, or
Hmm.
dare I say it, there may even been some paid agents among them to sort of sow this message. But we're in the fifth year, and every time Ukraine does something extraordinary, such as Operation Spiderweb, or just night after night taking hundreds of drones out of the sky, we seem to almost instantly either ignore or normalize that. And it's like, oh, well, that's happening somewhere to people far away. It doesn't really relate to us. Well, this is now coming back to bite us. And I think that was a key point of your documentary. I mean, what's your sense of the lessons that have not been learned?
We have learned virtually nothing that we should have been learning from Ukraine. They have paid for these lessons in blood. They have offered to teach us. And out of arrogance, out of hubris, we have decided that we know better. And we see the results of that. We saw the result of that in the first week of our war against Iran when a Shahed killed 6 Americans in Kuwait. I mean, this is probably a $20,000 drone. They don't get much more expensive than that the Ukrainians figured out years ago how to efficiently take out of the sky. I've been with these Ukrainian crews launching rockets against them, launching their drones against them, which only cost a few $1,000s, or shooting them down with 50 cals on the outskirts of Kyiv as the last line of defense. That's an extraordinary experience to be with one of those crews. And yet we're launching $2 million, sometimes $4 million interceptor missiles. And even then, they get through and hit a base with no overhead cover. American arrogance is killing American soldiers right now.
And often it takes more than one of these missiles. I think there's a preconception.
Hmm.
Sometimes it might take two, three, or even four to actually hit the target. And the costs, I mean, if you put a money counter on the screen, the noughts would be going up in furious pace. There seems another aspect of this. So we haven't learned that lesson. We haven't learned how to take these things out at scale. But there seems another lesson which we still are not drawing from this, despite the very, very real and visceral, I think, evidence of it. And that is that these cheap drones, the impact they can have against economic targets are just completely off the scale in terms of the sort of damage, economic damage, the sort of belief or trust in a place like Dubai, for instance. You know, $20,000 drone can literally cause billions of dollars in terms of impact. And loss of faith, loss of economic strength. That lesson does not really seem to be getting through, it seems to me.
No, I don't think it is getting through either. And the Iranians have figured out that they don't even need their drones to hit their targets to win. They can soak up missiles that cost 100 times as much. That's a win. They can create terror amongst the population. The sound of a shahed is going to be something that the citizens of UAE never forget, and they will never have that feeling of security again. because drones have pierced the veil. And you mentioned Operation Spiderweb. That is something that really hasn't sunk in with American planners when it comes to homeland security, when it comes to threats against the American homeland. Think about what the Ukrainians pulled off, by the way, without telling the Americans they were doing it. That should be another damning indictment of the credibility of our intelligence services. With $1 million or so of investment, the Ukrainians were able to pre-position container trucks with panels that opened up on these containers, launch drones that destroyed up to a third of Putin's strategic air fleet. And they could do the same things, not the Ukrainians, but anyone could do the same thing next to an American base or next to an American city. There's literally nothing today stopping a container ship from pulling into Boston Harbor or Seattle or Baltimore, having panels open up and launching drones to wreak havoc and sow terror. And we're not even talking about it, much less planning for it.
And this is where it gets a little theoretical, but it's something that people on the channel know I come back to a lot. These drone strikes, and this is the first time we've seen these full-scale drone strikes against, not even full-scale, but punctuated drone strikes against sort of Western targets and assets. And of course, against Israel, they've been shifted their strategy to smaller towns away from cities like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem that have stronger air defense. So again, there's this asymmetry of warfare. There's also the need to gain escalation dominance. Now, this is something I've been talking about throughout this 4 years, because this is clearly the Russian strategy at work here, which is to, no matter what your adversaries sink into the conflict, no matter what they give to Ukraine, Russia just has to stay one step ahead, do more, be less predictable, be more brutal, and you stay on top of the fight. In fact, you dissuade your adversaries from investing more in that fight. And we've seen the Western reluctance to close the skies over Ukraine, precisely because, I would say, of this escalation, dominance, terror, and narratives that are being seeded. Do you think that now applies to Iran? Does it feel that it has the upper hand through the use of that similar kind of strategy?
Well, I'm glad you hedged on calling them full-scale drone attacks, because the Ukrainians are getting hundreds, 800, 900 on some nights, back-to-back nights. And you're not seeing nearly that level in the Middle
It's a
East. And
fraction, isn't it? Yeah,
it's a fraction, and they're still getting through. So imagine if that scale was opened up on our Middle Eastern allies, much less our European allies. You saw a handful of Russian drones encroach into, I believe it was Polish airspace some months ago. Maybe it was Estonian. We scrambled fighters, right?
it was
For
Poland, definitely. They were around
uh,
1920, plus a
that's
bunch
right.
more shot down over Western Ukraine.
And that is not a scalable response. You cannot rely on your fighters to answer that kind of drone threat. You need the defense in depth that the Ukrainians have figured out, starting with fighters, but then with missiles, and finally with those guns that shoot down the ones that get through. We haven't learned any of those lessons. And of course, the Iranians have seen what the Russians have done. And they are going to fight this war, as I've said, on their terms, not on America's terms. And America, if we've learned anything from Iraq and Afghanistan, it's that we don't do asymmetric warfare well. I have to remind people, when they high five each other or chest bump over the destruction of Iran's navy and the destruction of Iran's air force in the opening days of the conflict, that Iraq's air force and Iraq's navy lasted all of 5 minutes, and the war turned into the longest wars between Iraq and Afghanistan in America's history. I don't think we should be congratulating ourselves on defeating their conventional forces when it's their unconventional, their asymmetric capability that is going to define the fight going forward.
And if, well, this is an interesting one. I don't know what you've heard about this, but I was speaking to a Ukrainian expert who deals with their intelligence services, the government, and so on, and they've been working on a substantive database of all of the hybrid attacks. cyber attacks,
Mm.
etc. Anything that has a footprint of Russia and Russia's proxies. And when this person met their Western counterparts, they were going to be fascinated to sort of see what has been compiled here,
Mm.
compare it, fill the gaps, learn more from the work that we're doing. And when they presented it, they realized that their database was the most definitive by a long way because this is not being coordinated. And therefore, if this data is not being collected, it's not being analyzed and the lessons drawn. Should we be fearful of a full-scale hybridized assault? And what might that look like, let's say, on the European continent?
Well, yes, not my domain of expertise, but anything that has an internet connection is vulnerable, from purification systems to our electrical grid. I mean, look at what we were able to do with those kinds of cyber attacks against Iran, what the Israelis in particular were able to do. If someone made a concerted effort to interrupt our or disrupt our electrical grid, our water distribution, our healthcare system in the US, incredibly vulnerable to those kinds of cyber attacks. If you look at the commercial attacks, meaning the ransomware attacks, the majority of which never are reported to the public, it's already a huge burden on the economy. Imagine if that had a a concerted state sponsor behind it and not just random groups of internet gangs. Imagine if that had the power of the Russian state or the Iranian state behind it in a concerted way. It could be truly, truly damaging.
And if you were to then combine that with kinetic activity,
Right.
drones, etc., actually dropping ordnance on airfields, logistics, ships ramming into ports. Now, this all sounds absolutely catastrophic and unimaginable. But all these things have happened in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
We had a ship who, by extreme coincidence, had a Russian captain. How extraordinary is that? And it rammed into a harbor, I think, where it damaged some very rare sort of aviation fuel that was being delivered. Again, pure coincidence. We had electricity substations going out, which took Heathrow Airport out for a day, I believe. Again, pure coincidence. It's old equipment. It's this. It's that. But it's this idea of combining multiple disciplines of asymmetric warfare together. It seems that we're absolutely not prepared for such a punch as that. And what would the impact on our ability to have a defensive response, to get our militaries coordinated while the civilian sphere is in absolute chaos?
Well, it would be devastating. And my best analog for this comes from my experience as a Navy vet, thinking about the USS Cole, which at the time represented with its picket ships the most sophisticated anti-missile defense system in the world. It could track and down as part of a fleet hundreds of incoming missiles at once. And now many years later, we are so proud of ourselves as the American military for being able to knock out Iran's missile launching capability, or at least degrade it significantly. But what nearly sunk the Cole, and what nearly killed 17 of its sailors? It wasn't a missile; it was a tugboat. And that is how the Iranians are going to fight. That's how this war is going to evolve. Even if we completely degrade their ability to launch missiles, they're gonna they're gonna send small boats across the Gulf and raid terminals in UAE and in Saudi Arabia. They're going to activate sleeper cells or encourage lone wolf attacks, as have already happened in the United States. And meanwhile, we're still going to be congratulating ourselves on our ability to down missiles. And the one wild card in all this that we haven't talked about yet, and people are not talking about enough, is the fact that Iran has 460 kilos of enriched uranium. The canard that got us into the Iraq War is actually real in Iran. Their ability to turn that into a dirty weapon, that's probably feasible tomorrow. Their ability to turn that into a low yield nuclear device, it probably wouldn't take very long. And air power is not going to solve that problem.
Yes, and of course they have. I think the other thing that seems to have been probably not ignored in the Pentagon because this stuff is known. But the idea that the Iranian regime would fold almost immediately, would be in awe of Western power and its might, is to ignore the fanatical nature of the regime. It's to ignore the theocratic basis of it and its internal assumptions of absolute rightness. Vis-a-vis, not just the West, but also its neighbors as well. I mean, this is a very tough nut to crack. This isn't Venezuela. This isn't even
Right.
Cuba, dare I say it. So where's this gone wrong? And where has where's the insights that must exist or are being put into little brown envelopes and or folders and passed over to the dear leader?
Well,
Where's this all gone wrong?
if insight has long since left this administration, it is I fear, a cult of personality at this point, and I don't think truth tellers are welcome in the administration, in the White House. I don't think the president's daily briefing is giving him bad news or worst case scenarios. The fact that he reportedly told his military, let's do this like we did Venezuela, that should send chills down the spine of any military planner who looks at Iran, sees a nation of 93 million people with enriched uranium, with a chokehold on a body of water that controls 20% of the world's oil supply. It is nothing like Venezuela, which, by the way, still has the Maduro regime in place for all intents and purposes. We did not affect regime change in Venezuela. We just changed the name of it. So I don't think there is a lot of insight feeding this administration. The one community that is supposed to, well, a few communities are supposed to exist above the political fray, but the IC, the intelligence community, has always prided itself on delivering hard truths. And yet you have a DNI, Director of National Intelligence, who before the Senate could not bring herself to challenge the president's clearly false statements about the nature of the Iranian threat. And I'm sure that same conversation happens in the Oval Office as well. Absolutely no pushback. A president who cannot hear the truth is a president who is going to get more Americans killed.
And again, to turn this out to America's traditional allies, we now seem to be giving a bit of the cold shoulder. I don't know if there is any stomach to talk actual truth to power. Um, and there's a degree of appeasement and fear, it seems, all round. But at this point, they've pretty much refused to participate. We have President Trump threatening to take out Iran's no, take out Iran's civilian power stations, which is, the implications of that is a clear war crime. It clearly mirrors the strategy of Vladimir Putin, which is
Mhm.
possibly where he may have got the idea from. But should we also be blaming partly America's allies who are too timid to push back and speak truth to power? Because this seems to me it simply enables and encourages what we're seeing to take place.
Perhaps. Well, yes. I'm sure there are critiques to be made around the edges, and I would like to see more forceful response, open response from America's allies. But I think behind the scenes, I have been struck, especially recently, by how forceful the pushback has been. Maybe not in the public eye, maybe not in official pronouncements, maybe not in statements behind the government podium. But if you look at NATO's response to America's threats against Greenland, I think that is a case study of how you deal with someone like Donald Trump, who it turns out is like every schoolyard bully we've ever encountered. They are a coward at heart, and when it became known, I suspect that Greenland and Denmark, and you add the French to that, and maybe even the Brits were prepared to fight. Just sending that signal, I think, was enough to get the U.S. to back down. I spent some time in Greenland as this was all blowing up, and I was struck. I actually wrote about this for The Atlantic by the willingness of the Greenlanders and their Danish friends to fight for their land. And that is a powerful statement. And I think that message made it back to, I hope it made it back to at least the military planners in the Pentagon and eventually the White House, that this is not going to be a cakewalk. You can't just take everything you want. So, in answer to your question, yes, I do wish that world leaders were less fearful of offending Donald Trump, but I have seen in their concrete actions some steps to truly stand up to him finally, and and I think they work.
That is, of course, a relief. And I got a report from Malcolm Nance similarly, who visited on the ground and
I
had
was with Malcolm.
similar thing. Oh, you were with Malcolm there? Okay.
Yes.
So you were seeing the same things. Hence why the stories coming together there. But it struck me. I put this question to Ben Hodges because one of the absolute absurdities of the situation, it seems to be now, is that for more than 4 years we have, out of timidity and appeasement of Russia and that coercive control, which is a sort of classic sort of Soviet technique, we have refused to close the skies over Ukraine. We now expect Ukraine to close the skies over Europe and the Middle East. The absurdity of that is extraordinary. Then we also have two NATO exercises, one maritime and one land-based, where embedded Ukrainian forces who are playing, I think they call it the Red Team,
Mm.
essentially took out 10 expert operators, took out 2 battalions of equipment. The press release said in half a day. My understanding is that it was in less than an hour. And then you have these maritime exercises where the Ukrainians absolutely sort of aced each of these tests and supposedly would have actually sunk an entire frigate in that exercise if it had been real. 5 exercises, clear wins for Ukrainian techniques. And yet, this is an alliance where Ukraine is teaching, is playing a leadership role, and yet is not allowed to join. Again, you have these two absolute absurdities taking place.
Yeah, nothing to add to that. It is absurd. It is inexplicable unless you introduce the element of hubris and pride. And I think some of it honestly comes down to, if you remember that visual of Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office, and even though in physical stature one might stand a head taller than the other, I think Trump deep down realizes that Zelensky makes him look small. And and I think pride has a lot to do with it. Trump is deeply resentful of Zelensky, who is everything that Trump never will be.
Yes, and well, we can mention the five times draft dodging and why that resentment and would be building up there. Let's in the closing minutes turn back towards Ukraine because it seems that we are at something of an inflection point. We've had, I would say, two philosophies, two political systems, two industrial systems pitted against one another. One is the vertical of Russia, which is the ability to mass produce and give commands and things happen, etc., and marshal, large-scale resources in the service of, obviously, evil in this instance. And we have the Ukrainian horizontal, which has produced a sort of complex ecosystem, a zoo of drones, a ferment of experimentation. It perhaps wasn't even clear a year and a half ago, which of those systems was going to edge ahead. It seems to me, at least from what I'm seeing and recent trips as well, that the horizontal is not just pushing ahead, but is accelerating dramatically away. We had Russians experiencing the highest by far 1 day casualty inflicted on them last week. We have parts of the front starting to cave into Ukrainian techniques and so-called creeping barrages of drones and so on. And we now have Z Patriots who are starting to squeal, properly squeal like stuck pigs, which is interesting. Do you feel we're at a kind of inflection point here where Ukrainian innovation, will, courage, skill, all of these things combined are going to start overwhelming their adversary?
I hope so. I do not know enough about the the disposition of Russian forces and the status of their morale, because you cannot discount just how brutal the Russians are willing to be to maintain those front lines. I mean, I've heard Russians themselves now pick up a Ukrainian term to describe Russian infantry, which is human radar, right? They are willing to send masses of men towards Ukrainian positions just to find out where the machine guns are, proverbially. The other thing that really strikes me about Ukrainian innovation is the innovation of morale structures and economic structures. And one area where those two combine is in the gamification of the drone war, which I find incredibly fascinating. Another Atlantic piece I wrote about how the Ukrainian command can essentially, with the click of a button, change the behavior of their frontline troops by shifting incentives, something that would probably take days or weeks in the American military, that would require a new operations order and briefings and all of this kind of thing. With updating a web portal that reassigns point values to different targets and rewards the drone operators with prizes for confirmed kills, you can reassign target priorities with the click of a button. And the Ukrainians have innovated that. The Ukrainians invented that on the battlefield, and I've seen it in action when I was embedded with one of these kamikaze drone units. That morning, the high priority target was Russian special forces. Because they were expecting infiltrations, and a sister unit we helped track, but it was a sister unit that picked up two Spetsnaz crossing the river on jet skis. And within a matter of hours, they had been tracked and killed. And it didn't require a new operations order. It didn't require a new doctrine. It just required the Ukrainians logging into the platform, seeing that they'd get more points for this target today, and prioritizing it. Extraordinary.
It's extraordinary. And then there's follow-on effects, aren't there? Which, the question to you would be how Western military is going to adapt to this. But the follow-on effects are that point system also that will allocate resources to the manufacturers of particular drones that are more effective. It will allocate resources to the battalions that have been shown to use those resources more effectively. And ultimately, that will also build the cachet or the brand power of certain battalions, which will then be used in their recruitment campaigns. So you've got this extraordinary, I would say, blend of it's got a military capitalism almost in its
Really.
rawest form. But this is going to be an incredible challenge, and many Ukrainians was, well, it's not perfect. We're still working out the kinks in this system. We're still experimenting. But how challenging is that going to be for Western militaries to adopt these sort of extremely agile principles?
Well, I don't know that we will be, because our vested interests are just so entrenched. There is no incentive for the prime contractors to help usher in this new way of waging war. I've seen the innovation cycle in Ukraine last for hours, days at most, as the units themselves, not outsourced to a contractor, but the units themselves were printing bespoke warheads the night before their missions based on the next day's target sets. It was actually the triggering mechanisms for the warheads, but that triggering mechanism is different depending on whether it's an armored target, an artillery piece, infantry, that kind of thing. And they were able to iterate in the moment at the front in a matter of hours. That kind of innovation cycle takes literally years in the United States. And it is partly by design, because people make money the longer it takes weapons to be developed. The more review cycles you have, the more bells and whistles you add to a weapon system, the more expensive it gets. And that benefits everybody except the society that's hoping to win its next war.
And then the profit comes in the ability to scale that. The unit cost goes down, the profit margin goes up. But you can't stockpile these munitions in Ukraine because they'll be ineffective. Within weeks,
Right.
it will no longer be an effective piece of kit.
Right.
So again, that suggests that we're going to have some real problems there if we stick with, as you say, the Miltech primes.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No love lost for the Miltech primes. They're in most cases holding back innovation. Well, mean, the real tragedy is we were warned about this when Eisenhower left office. The military-industrial complex, which he warned about, is now the dominant force in American defense innovation.
And of course, has its claws into, dare I say it, parts of the political establishment as well. We have issues too, I'm sure. Last question. If we're going to learn these lessons, it seems to me it's going to be like Don't Look Up. And many Ukrainians tell me that we won't learn these lessons until the bombs are falling on our heads and we learn the lesson in blood and pain and loss. That unfortunately seems to be the only way we may actually change.
I agree with that. And that's been my answer when I've been presented with this question over the last couple of weeks. And my mind goes back to 9/11. And that was a wake-up call for America that shocked us out of our complacency. I fear it's going to take something like that again to shock us out of our complacency when it comes to drones. And I am convinced it's coming simply because the bar is so low to launch that kind of attack, and our enemies are so determined. It's just a matter of math. It's just a matter of timing. This kind of attack is going to come, and I think there's very little hope for defending against it with this administration. But hopefully, the American people will demand the kind of response in their political behavior and usher in a new kind of administration that can, first of all, stop making stupid decisions like wars of choice and then defend America the way it deserves to be defended.
Well, Ken, your extraordinary experiences in Ukraine, your articles and research are helping to bring about that awakening process, and hopefully the price in blood and loss will be less as a result. Thanks so much for what you do, and thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks. Really appreciated being here. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this video. Your support is massively appreciated. Here's just a quick notice at the end of it. Please do stick with this because here are two important messages. Firstly, there are links in the description of this, and I really want to share with you the work of Stephen Moore and his team, founder of Ukraine Freedom Project. He's a former congressional Republican chief of staff, and he's been in Ukraine now for most of the full-scale war. In fact, he was there on day 5 of the war, and he's produced an extraordinary film, A Faith Under Siege, that documents Russian atrocities against Ukrainian Christians. If you haven't seen that, if you haven't even seen the teaser, I strongly recommend you look at that, and of course look at the wider work that his team does to evangelize the importance of Ukraine as a topic, especially and crucially now amongst congressional Republicans. Khartiia is a Ukrainian corps operating around Kupiansk, which is a critical area of the front. Now, this campaign won't be for everybody. It is a kinetic campaign in that we are crowdsourcing here for funds to buy Vampire drones, 15 in fact. 5 of those have already been achieved in this campaign, but we are looking to scale this up to get the full amount of $40,000 US. That's going to Dzyga's Paw that are handling this. This is an incredibly important campaign. There are many creators who are taking part in this. My view is that it's not enough at this point just to help Ukraine to survive. It's not enough just to invest in humanitarian causes. Not everyone's going to be comfortable with this, but they have to remove the invaders from their lands. To do that, they need the skills, the munitions, the weaponry to achieve that. This is where these vampire drones come in. So please, this isn't a full polished promo. I'm still working on that, but the campaign launches today. Please do check it out and, of course, help in any way that you can.